Welcome to M&A Talk, the #1 podcast on all things related to mergers and acquisitions. Brought to you by Morgan & Westfield.
So what's your advice to sellers to prepare for due diligence and prepare their business for sale and to be able to maximize the value?
Thank you for that question, because I actually run our sell side efforts in our practice. And this is one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking through. So the #1 value creator, in my opinion, for any seller is removal of ambiguities in the sales process. Because if you think about it, if you're a buyer and if there are ambiguities in terms of operations, the buyers will never take seller's word for it. They will instead penalize or chisel against the EBITDA of the seller to basically, account for what they perceive as potential pitfalls of the organization. So if you remove those ambiguities, if you make the story as clear as possible and supported by all the operational results, that makes for a better valuation.
That's a really good point. Can you give me an example of an ambiguity?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a client that was contemplating selling its business unit, and that business unit contemplated of 7 businesses with various degrees of integration. And they came to us and they said, look, we're thinking about selling this business unit, but beyond the fact that it's a carve-out, so there is ambiguity already set up in the way that the sale process will unfold, because you have a larger organization and then you have a business unit that doesn't have its own standalone financials, which have to be prepared and so on. The added complexity is that that business unit has a bunch of different companies in it with a varying degree of integration. Help us build a picture. Help us, paint a picture of how all of these units could be integrated, and help us get on that way of integration as we're selling the whole business unit, so the buyers could see us performing all of this. And we basically created and that's part of our sort of sell side offering, we created a report that described the way this organization will perform standalone and showed to a high degree of complexity and detail how different functions will be integrated in terms of timing, who does what, when, and so on. And when the buyers see that degree of fidelity and they hear management speak to that degree of fidelity with a high degree of confidence in terms of, yes, we're going to get it done by month X, the following things, the chart of accounts is going to be unified by date Y, and all the legal entities are going to be rationalized, and we started the process here, and so on and so forth. And they see at every little point on every function that degree of fidelity. Buyers get conviction, buyers get religion, buyers become interested, and then buyers bid and bid better. And that's ultimately what we want, which is, on behalf of a seller at least, to maximize the valuation that they would get for the asset.
That's a very good point, because valuation is always risk versus reward. And on the risk side, there's varying degrees of risk. Of course, you look at some of the treasury notes, T-bill and so forth, that are used as a peg in valuation that are assumed as minimal risk. And that's interesting, because the less ambiguity, the more clear something is, the lower the risk, and therefore the higher the valuation that can be justified. And I really like that point. Can you think of one more example of a potential ambiguity?
So one of the things that we do is we self-scout our sell-side clients. So when management hires us to sell their organization, by the way, I want to make sure that I'm very clear. We are not investment bankers. So we work with investment bankers, but we are not actually procuring buyers. We're not helping actual sale process. We just create the operational blueprint as to how the organization would look in the hands of a new buyer or the new organization. But when management comes to us and our clients come to us and say, help us do this, one of the things that we do is self-scout. So we will go into the organization. We'll look for things that, if we were on the buy side, we would, highlight and say, that's a problem. And then we address it. Because if you own the conversation, if you are the one bringing this forward to the buyer universe, you own the narrative. And therefore, you can address it in a way that would be most advantageous to some degree to your client, to the seller. So an example of something that many times think through is when we are helping our clients with a sale and they have examples of demonstrable success in doing something that is very much similar to what we want them to do. So for example, if we have a client with an integration hangover or a bunch of things that are not integrated, but they were able to show that they could integrate it somewhere else, and we can point to that. Or we say these particular functions could be offshored into different places, and therefore there could be an arbitrage on salaries. And we can point to another instance where this client did that successfully. Those are the examples of parts of our service and parts of the value that we bring in, where we highlight abilities of the management that could be applied elsewhere, and buyers can look at and really feel good that all of our assertions actually are true and they're not just hot air and not representative of reality. And ultimately that translates in better valuation.
M&A Talk is brought to you by Morgan & Westfield, a nationwide leader in mergers and acquisitions for small to mid-market companies. If you've enjoyed this show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Learn more at morganandwestfield.com. While we take reasonable care to select recognized experts for our podcast, please note that each podcast presents the independent opinions of such experts only, and not of Morgan & Westfield. We make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information provided. Any reliance on the podcast information is at your own risk. The podcast is for general information only and cannot be considered legal or professional advice.